He said, "I fixed it." And I should have asked what he meant. It was the kind of sentence that should have opened a conversation, not closed it. But the fight had gone long, longer than either of us wanted to admit, and I was tired. Not sleep tired, but something more exhausted, the kind of fatigue that came from pretending nothing was wrong while everything twisted under the surface. He said it from behind me, near the hallway light, just before he went upstairs. I was rinsing the cutting board, watching pasta remnants swirl down the drain, trying to remember what the fight was even about. Something small. Something stupid. But it had lasted all night because neither of us ever said what we really meant. When he spoke those 3 words, he kissed the top of my head like punctuation. I didn't turn around. I just nodded once as if it made sense. As if I knew what he was referring to. But I didn't. And that's the moment I keep playing back. Because if I had asked, if I had stopped him right there, maybe I would have understood sooner what was already unraveling. The next morning it was just a mug. My mug. The black one with the chip in the rim and the peeling text that said, "Not today, Satan." A joke from a bachelorette party years ago. Back when I still laughed out loud without checking who was in the room. It wasn't valuable, not really. But I'd used it every day since we moved into this house. It was mine in a way most things weren't anymore. And it was gone. I checked the dishwasher, the cabinets, even the trash. I asked him if he'd seen it. He didn't look up from his phone. "Which one?" he asked, already chewing a piece of toast like we weren't talking about anything real. "The one I always use," I said, feeling absurd for even asking. "You mean that gross chipped one? I thought we got rid of it." He was casual, like it was obvious, like he was helping. I blinked. "No, we didn't." His face shifted slightly. "Maybe it broke. You sure you didn't toss it? You said it scratched your lip last week." He was calm, almost gentle, like he was trying to remind me of something I'd forgotten. But I hadn't. I knew that mug was fine. And I hadn't said that. But now I was doubting myself. It wasn't just the mug. That's how these things start. One missing object that you almost convince yourself never existed in the first place. But that week I started to notice other things. The small bottle of lavender oil my sister gave me when she moved abroad, it used to sit on the shelf above the bed, and I used it every Sunday night to help me sleep. Gone. The sketch I drew in college that used to hang behind the laundry door, the one he said looked haunted but in a good way, also gone. I searched the house with a kind of quiet desperation, not frantic, just deeply unsettled. I didn't want to believe it was intentional. I told myself maybe I was misplacing things. But then I checked behind the spice jars. I had drawn a little heart in Sharpie there on a random Tuesday, back when we still flirted over groceries. It was a dumb moment, but I kept it because he smiled when he saw it the first time. I checked that wall now. Clean. Not painted over. Just scrubbed off. Like it had never happened. Like he'd erased it. He said, "I fixed it," again the following Thursday, when I mentioned the faint smell of gas in the living room. He had just finished bathing the dog and was walking toward me, towel slung casually over one shoulder. I told him about the smell, and without missing a beat he smiled and said, "Yeah, I noticed. I fixed it." I asked what it was and he shrugged. "Probably just pilot light buildup. I adjusted it. Nothing to worry about." He kissed my forehead like I should be grateful. I asked if we should call someone just to be sure. And he gave me that look, the one that's almost too patient, the one that says I'm not mad, just disappointed you don't trust me. "Babe," he said softly, "I always take care of it." And I didn't push. Because by then I had already started doubting myself. What if I was imagining things? What if I was projecting? And more disturbingly, what if this was normal and I was the one making it strange? It was the voicemail that broke me. Or maybe not broke, but cracked something I couldn't unsee. It was a saved message from my father, left 2 months before he died. Just his voice saying he was proud of me, that he missed me, that he hoped I wasn't losing myself in someone else's story. I played it once every few months since. A grounding ritual. I knew exactly where it lived in my phone under saved, the only message in that folder. One evening after he fell asleep on the couch, I reached for it. But the folder was empty. Not moved. Not backed up. Deleted. Gone. I searched everything, recently deleted cloud backups, synced apps. Nothing. I hadn't deleted it. I would never delete that. When I asked him, gently, cautiously, if he'd done any updates on my phone, he shook his head. Nope. And then with a casual glance at the screen, maybe you deleted it by accident? My mouth opened then closed.
No.
I didn't. He tilted his head, his voice low and steady. Well, voicemails expire, right? I stared at him. Not if you save them. He paused then smiled softly. I guess it's just one of those things. That night I began documenting everything. Quietly. Systematically. I took photos of drawers, shelves, digital folders, password lists. I emailed myself copies of things, stored backups in hidden places, started keeping notes in a journal I hid in the bottom of my closet beneath the winter scarves I hadn't worn in years. It wasn't about proving anything to him, not yet. It was about proving something to myself. That I wasn't losing my grip. That these things were real. That they were mine. It felt ridiculous, secretive, obsessive. But it also felt necessary. I didn't think he was trying to hurt me. Not then. I just thought maybe he wanted me simpler. Lighter. Easier to hold. And that terrified me more than if he'd been cruel. They don't tell you that manipulation can sound like love. That you can lose pieces of yourself not through abuse but through gentle edits, things done for you, not to you. That's what kept me quiet. He always sounded so sincere. So thoughtful. Like someone who fixed things. And when I spoke up, he listened. But not to what I was saying, only to how it threatened the version of me he preferred. And so I began to retreat. Not loudly, not defiantly, just one layer at a time. I spoke less. Smiled more. Hid things. I learned to nod at the right moments. But underneath I was building something, an inventory of truth. A record of who I used to be. I keep thinking back to that night in the kitchen. The way he said it. The timing. I fixed it. I think about how normal it felt. How I let it go. How I rinsed the cutting board, wiped the counter, climbed the stairs, and never once looked over my shoulder. I should have asked what he meant. I should have asked what exactly he thought was broken. It started with the tea canister. The one with the dented lid and the scent of bergamot that reminded me of the only place I ever felt like I could breathe, my grandmother's kitchen. I kept it on the top shelf, behind the less used spices, a little act of defiance in a house that seemed to sort itself without me. One morning I reached for it and it was gone. I didn't panic. I just stood on the chair a little longer, moved jars like puzzle pieces, then climbed down and stared at the empty space. The quiet felt louder than usual. I walked to the trash, checked the outside bin, then stood in the center of the kitchen and whispered aloud, "Where are you putting my life?" Not as a question, as an accusation, because something had shifted. The doubt was gone. I knew now. I wasn't losing things. He was removing them. Carefully. Deliberately. Like a curator editing an exhibit. I started watching him. Not in the way a lover watches, but the way a witness studies a suspect without blinking. I watched how he opened my drawers. How he stood in front of my closet too long when he said he was just looking for socks. How he closed apps on my laptop just a little too quickly when I walked by. I began logging everything in the burner notebook I kept taped under my car's spare tire compartment. I even stopped using the Notes app on my phone. At night I'd pretend to sleep, then wait for the quiet shifts in the house. Doors creaking softly open, footsteps on the carpet, the almost imperceptible sound of drawers closing just slightly out of alignment. He wasn't looking for anything. He already knew where things were. He was making sure I didn't know anymore. The worst part wasn't the loss. It was the way he gaslit reality into silence. I asked about the tea. He smiled and said, "I thought you were over that phase." When I hesitated, he chuckled softly. "You haven't even used it in months." I wanted to scream, "That's not the point." But instead I nodded. Said, "Right?" Because that was easier than the argument I knew would follow. One where he'd lay out little pieces of false memory like breadcrumbs and dare me to call them lies. He was so good at it. He didn't accuse. He questioned. Softly. Casually. "Are you sure? Didn't you say? I thought you hated that." He made you doubt your defense before you even built it. The day I found the password scrap, I stopped doubting anything. I was cleaning behind the dresser, deep cleaning, the kind you do when you need to pretend everything is normal. That's when I saw it, tucked between the wall and the baseboard. A torn piece of paper in my handwriting. It had my old Gmail address, the one I hadn't used since grad school, and a password I hadn't written down in years. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember where I'd kept it, why it was here. how it got out of the envelope in my desk drawer. Then I remembered. He told me he reorganized my documents to help me declutter. That was a month ago. I never asked for help. I never gave him that envelope. And here was proof. Physical. Undeniable. A fragment of autonomy that should have never left where I placed it. My hands shook when I tucked it into my bra, like I'd just smuggled contraband in my own house. From that point on, I split myself in two. There was the version he saw, quieter, slower to react, grateful when he helped me by tossing old receipts or updating my calendar. And then there was the version beneath, the one building a case, collecting fragments of erased selfhood like bones from a mass grave. I started backing up old files to flash drives and mailing them to a P.O. box I opened during a fake errand. I bought a used laptop in cash from a woman on Craigslist and kept it in the bottom of the donation bin under old sweaters. I became strategic, meticulous, but I never stopped smiling. That was the currency of survival. Appearing untouched while reconstructing yourself in secret. My dreams changed too. I used to dream of wide open spaces, fields, airports, train stations. Now I dreamed of blank rooms, white walls, locked doors. I dreamed of walking through my childhood home and realizing in horror that all the photos had been replaced with stock images, generic smiles, backgrounds that didn't belong. I woke up with my heart pounding, unsure if the dream had been metaphor or memory. Because sometimes in waking life I'd look at a photo and wonder, was this always here? I started taking pictures of the pictures, printing them out, hiding them. I didn't know what he might change next. And then came the message. A missed call from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in months, maybe longer. She'd left a voicemail, one I saw appear in real time on my phone. But when I tapped it later, it was gone. I called her back immediately. She sounded surprised. Hey, I left a message when I heard about your mom. Didn't think I'd catch you. I froze. When? Last week, she said. Wednesday night. I said I was here if you needed anything. I told her I never got it. She said she figured I was just retreating. She sounded hurt. I said I was sorry. But after I hung up, I went to the settings and scrolled through the blocked contacts list. Her number was there. I didn't block her. That night I took the scrap of paper, the one with the password, and taped it to the back of my journal, just to remind myself that my reality was real, that I was not imagining this, that someone was rewriting the edges of my world with such precision that the center still felt stable. That's what terrified me the most. Not that I was being manipulated, but that I almost couldn't feel it anymore. It was starting to feel like routine, normal, expected, and somewhere in all that silence, in the quiet theft of things I hadn't realized mattered, I began to understand. This wasn't about cleaning up the past or simplifying life. It wasn't about organization or forgetting. This was curation, a slow deletion of the inconvenient parts of me. The girl who held on to things, who remembered too much, who loved objects because they held feelings. That girl was being disassembled. With a smile, with care, and with intention. I started keeping track of what stayed. It sounds backward, I know, after so much had already gone missing. But I realized something. The items he didn't erase meant something too. The cheap birthday card from his mother still sat on the bookshelf. The ugly brass clock from his college days, front and center on the mantel. He never touched his past, only mine. Only the pieces of me that weren't filtered through him. It hit me one morning when I reached for my backup flash drive and found it exactly where I left it. For a split second I exhaled, thinking maybe I was safe. But then I realized, he wanted me to think it was safe. He didn't touch the obvious things. Only the ones that couldn't scream when they were gone. That's when I stopped searching for what was missing and started inventorying what survived. Because what he left behind was a map of what he believed I didn't need. And that told me who he thought I was supposed to become. I changed the way I moved through the house. Not drastically, just enough to shift the rhythm. I took different routes to the kitchen. I moved the shampoo to a new shelf each night. I let the dog out at uneven times. I wanted to see what he noticed, what he tried to fix. And he noticed everything. One night, I left a coffee mug in the sink, a plain one unmarked. And the next morning it was washed, dried, and sitting slightly crooked on the shelf as if to say, look, I'm still taking care of things. I started using that mug daily, letting it accumulate the tiniest chips. Watching him watch it. He never mentioned it. But I knew he hated it. And that was power. Small stupid power. But power all the same. The second laptop was my real turning point. I bought it from a woman named Liza, who met me in a grocery store parking lot, wearing a Led Zeppelin t-shirt and aviators. Cash only. No questions. She reminded me of the kind of woman I might have been if I hadn't softened so many of my edges. I took the laptop home wrapped in a sweater. I didn't boot it up for 2 days. Just kept it under the back seat of the car, in a Ziploc bag like evidence I wasn't ready to present. When I finally opened it, I used a random hotspot from a nearby restaurant to connect. I created new email accounts, uploaded all the photos I had left, wrote timelines, names, dates, things I remembered and things I thought I remembered. It was the closest I had come to writing a confession, not of guilt, but of memory, a record of the woman I had once been, in case I lost her again. I began to feel less like I was hiding and more like I was waiting, for what I didn't know yet. But there was a quiet tension in my chest, like holding a full glass of water while walking across a shifting floor. Everything I did was cautious but not desperate. I started dressing differently, subtler tones, simpler lines, things he wouldn't comment on. When he asked how work was going, I gave him rehearsed answers with soft edges. When he offered to help organize my inbox, I smiled and told him I already had. I said it sweetly, gratefully. I said it like the woman he was trying to keep. But under the surface I was building scaffolding. Not to escape. Not yet. But to stabilize. To learn where all the exits were, and which walls might collapse if I leaned too hard. The hardest part was mourning the silence. There used to be a kind of stillness in our home that felt sacred. Sunday mornings with jazz playing softly. Tuesday nights when the world outside dimmed, and we curled into each other like parentheses. I missed that version of us. I missed believing he loved me without condition. Now every quiet moment felt weaponized. If he brought me tea, I wondered if he had read my messages. If he kissed my shoulder, I wondered if he was covering something up. It's a strange thing to grieve a reality that maybe never existed. But I did. Quietly. In the bathtub. In the car. In the half second before falling asleep. That grief hardened into something useful. Like scar tissue, ugly yes. But durable. Then there was the journal he found. Not the burner one. A smaller one I'd forgotten about. Just a few pages, tucked into a shoebox under the bed. I came home one night, and found it placed neatly on my pillow. Open to a page where I had written, I think he's editing my life when I'm not looking. No note. No comment. Just that page centered. Waiting. I stared at it for a long time. Longer than made sense. Then picked it up and smiled. I left it on his desk. A kind of offering. I wanted him to think I was embarrassed. That I felt exposed. But I wasn't. I was measuring his silence. Because that was his tell. He never confronted. He just recalibrated. And he didn't bring it up. Not once. But 3 days later, my backup email was inaccessible. The password had been changed. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay in bed and let the ceiling stare back at me. I thought about the first time he told me he loved me. How certain he'd sounded. How warm his hand felt on the small of my back. I thought about how love can be a type of revision. How maybe he never loved me. But the version he could manage. The version who wouldn't question. Who would accept his care as a form of control. I realized, with a kind of bitter clarity, that I wasn't in a relationship. I was in a restoration project. And he was the contractor, quietly sanding down every splinter, until I fit the blueprint he drew without asking. The next morning, I didn't say anything about the journal, or the password. I made us both eggs. Sat at the table. Told him a made-up story about a coworker I didn't like. He laughed. Kissed my temple. Said, "You're always so good at reading people." And I smiled. Because I was learning to read him. Every blink. Every phrase. Every edit. I was learning that the best lies weren't spoken. They were lived. And I was almost ready to stop living his. She texted me at 11:48 p.m. Are you okay? Just that. No context. No emojis. Not even her name. But I knew who it was by the punctuation. Alina always texted like a lighthouse. Brief flashes of care. No fanfare, just signal. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, maybe longer. Not because we fell out, but because I stopped replying. Or so I thought. When I saw her name light up my phone, my chest tightened. A strange cocktail of guilt and relief. I opened the thread and saw a blank space where her previous message should have been. Nothing. Just her question hanging there, suspended like a hook in water. I typed back, "I think so." Then stared at the blinking cursor for a long time before I sent it. She replied 30 seconds later, "Can I see you?" We met the next morning in a bakery 2 towns over. One he didn't know about. A place I hadn't been to in years, but remembered for the orange scones and cracked teal tiles in the corner booth. I got there early, sat facing the door. My hands wouldn't stop folding the napkin. When she walked in, I saw her before she saw me, hair longer, face thinner, but the same piercing way she looked at the world, like she expected it to blink first. She sat across from me and didn't say anything at first. Just looked. Not suspicious. Just scanning. Finally she said, "You look quiet." And I smiled because she was right. I did. We talked around the edges of things for the first half hour. Old work stories. People we didn't like. Who got married. Who moved. But then she leaned in, lowered her voice and said, "I texted you when your mom got sick. Twice. Called too." My stomach dropped. "When?" I asked, but I already knew. She told me the dates. I remembered them. I remembered waiting for messages that never came. "I figured you were avoiding me," she said. "Or him." I shook my head. "I never saw anything." She pulled out her phone. Scrolled. Showed me the green check marks. "You got them," she said quietly. "You just didn't respond." When I got home, I waited until he was in the shower before I opened my phone and checked the blocked list again. Her number wasn't there now, but I knew it had been. He must have unblocked it when she texted this time to make sure I wouldn't notice. My hands were cold. I felt them shaking, but not out of panic. Out of rage. Clean, focused rage. The kind that didn't burn, just settled. Like weight. I opened my drawer and pulled out the old envelope from Alina, the one she'd given me at the bakery, almost as an afterthought. "Found this when I moved," she'd said. "Didn't know if you'd want it." It was a yellow envelope, faded, sealed with a bit of tape and her looping handwriting across the front. "Nora before." That's what it said. Just that. I opened it slowly. Inside was a photo I'd completely forgotten existed. It was of me. Messy bun, paint on my forearms, standing in the middle of my old apartment surrounded by blank canvases and paper scraps. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't posing. Just frozen mid-motion, caught in the act of existing. I looked real. Unguarded. Uncurated. I stared at it for a long time, longer than made sense, then flipped it over. On the back, in my own handwriting, it said, "Don't shrink for someone who claims to love you." A phrase I used to write on mirrors. A rule I used to live by. Before. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table long after the lights were off, the photo pressed to my chest, trying to remember the version of myself who wrote those words. I thought about how love can become a mirror you don't recognize until it's too clean. How comfort can be a kind of anesthesia. How slow the erasure was, how skillful. Not violent. Not even cruel. Just consistent. Like waves shaping stone. I realized that he hadn't just blocked Alina's number. He had disconnected me from the people who remembered who I used to be. Because memory is dangerous when it's shared. It becomes harder to rewrite. I decided to test him. Not big. Just small. I created a new note in the hidden laptop. An entry titled Experiment 1. I left my keys on the wrong hook. I moved his cologne bottle slightly out of line. I changed the background on my tablet to a photo of my mom and me. One he said he didn't like because she always looked like she was judging him. I waited. 2 days later, the photo was gone. Not deleted. Just changed back. No mention of it.
No explanación.
But in the cache folder, I found the timestamp. It had been changed at 2:13 a.m. I was asleep. He wasn't. He had logged in, restored the normal version of things, and gone back to bed. I sent Alina a new message the next day. Just a photo of the yellow envelope. No words. She responded, "Whenever you're ready." And I knew what she meant. Not to run. Not yet. But to speak. To tell the truth. Out loud. Even if only to one person. Because silence, I was learning, was his strongest weapon. Not control. Not logic. But silence. the ability to replace memory with doubt, to replace story with absence. And the only way to fight that wasn't with confrontation, it was with narration. I had to keep speaking even if just to her, even if just to myself. Later that evening I found something else, hidden inside the coat I hadn't worn since winter. A small note I'd written to myself last December. I didn't remember writing it, but the handwriting was mine. Said, he always changes the ending. Start writing your own. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't profound. But it was mine. And it made me cry, not because it was sad, but because it meant that even then some version of me knew. Some version of me had already started clawing her way back. I didn't mean to break the rule. I just forgot to close the browser tab. That's how it started. A single oversight. The backup laptop was only ever opened when he wasn't home. Only ever used on a separate network, tucked away before he returned. But that day I miscalculated. He came home early, said something about a canceled meeting, the way people do when they're testing how closely you've been listening. I smiled, kissed him on the cheek, offered to make tea. He said yes. That was all. But later that night, after dinner, after the dishes, after the silence, we went to bed, and I felt it in his breathing. Different. Slower. Controlled. The way you breathe when you're pretending to be asleep. I lay still for a long time, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might wake him. I knew then he'd seen it. He didn't mention it the next morning. He poured my coffee, kissed my forehead, left for work with the same practice warmth he used like camouflage. But when I came back into the house after pretending to run an errand, the backup laptop was gone. Not moved. Gone. The sweater I kept it in was still folded, untouched. The bin looked undisturbed. But the laptop was no longer there. And I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I just walked to the kitchen, stood in front of the window, and stared into the backyard like a woman watching herself from somewhere far away. I waited until the sun lowered enough to paint the counters gold. Then I called Alina. Let it ring once. Hung up. That was the signal. That night I cooked dinner the way I always did, pasta with too much garlic, his favorite. He complimented the flavor. Told me I looked settled. I watched him while he chewed, and for a second I could almost believe this was still a life. Almost. Until he set his fork down and said, "Can I ask you something?" I said sure, carefully. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Why don't you trust me anymore?" He said it like a therapist, like someone giving me the opportunity to confess. I didn't answer right away. Just looked down at my plate, then up at him. He smiled, tired, patient, practiced. I saw the folder, the photos, the timeline. He paused. "Do you really think I've been trying to hurt you?" I wanted to scream yes. I wanted to throw the plate against the wall and demand my name back. But instead I asked, why? My voice was quiet, measured. The question held all its weight in how little I gave it. He sighed like a man burdened by love. "Because you were falling apart, Nora. You were always anxious, always overwhelmed. You never remembered anything. You forgot to pay bills. You lost passwords. You left burners on." He leaned back, searching my face. "You were drowning. I helped. I fixed it." I stared at him. "You fixed what exactly?" He blinked. "And then this is what I'll never forget," he said it. Calm. Clean. Certain. "I fixed you." The silence after that wasn't empty. It was deafening. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because somewhere inside me a floor gave way. Not from shock. From recognition. He meant it. He truly, deeply believed that love gave him permission to erase, to smooth the edges of my life until they no longer cut him. I asked, "What gave you the right?" And he laughed, not cruelly but gently. "You did. Every time you forgot something and let me handle it. Every time you broke down and I put you back together. I thought you'd be grateful." He said it like a gift. Like a man who believed he'd saved a stray animal from the cold and couldn't understand why it bit him. I stood. Slowly. Not in anger. Not in panic. Just because I couldn't stay seated anymore. "You deleted my father's voicemail." He shrugged. "It was unhealthy. You were clinging to the past. You said so yourself." "I didn't mean erase it," I said. "That message, he was proud of me." His voice softened, like he was correcting a child. "I'm proud of you now. That should matter more." I backed up a step. Not because he threatened me, but because I was suddenly aware of the size of his delusion. of the machinery behind it. This wasn't about control. It was about conviction. He wasn't punishing me. He was curating me. Like a project. A personal art installation called A Better Nora. He stood then, too. Walked toward me slowly, palms open. You don't have to be afraid of me, he said. I'm the one who made you feel safe. My voice didn't shake. You made me forget who I was. He paused. His face softened again, the way it always did when he thought he was close to convincing me. You weren't happy before. You were lost. I gave you structure. I gave you peace. He stepped closer. And you were better for it. You are better. I nodded once. A small detached movement. That's not love, I said. That's redesign. He didn't respond. Just looked at me like I was breaking his heart for refusing the version of me he built. And in that moment I understood the truth that would carry me into what came next. He would never stop. Because to him this was love. Not a prison. Preservation. And people don't apologize for saving what they believe would have been ruined without them. That night I lay awake beside him, silent. He fell asleep quickly, breathing steady. I listened to it, counted each inhale like seconds on a timer. I thought of the flash drives, the yellow envelope, the blocked numbers, the laptop now hidden who knows where. I thought of what I'd lost. But more importantly, I thought of what he never found. Because he didn't know me as well as he believed. He curated what he saw, but he never saw what lived beneath. And that meant I still had time. I woke up the next morning and made him breakfast. I didn't want to. Every cell in my body recoiled at the idea of cooking for him, feeding him, pretending. But that was the point. I needed to know what he was paying attention to. I needed to see how far the performance had to go before he let his guard drop. So I stood at the stove in the sweatshirt he said made me look approachable. Hair pulled back the way he liked. And I made eggs exactly the way he preferred. Soft whites, yolks intact, toast cut diagonally. When I placed the plate in front of him, he looked up like nothing had changed, like we hadn't stood on opposite sides of a quiet war the night before. You're good to me, he said. I smiled. Not because I meant it, but because I wanted to see how closely he watched my mouth when I lied. He didn't ask about the confrontation. Didn't bring up the things I'd said. He behaved like the conversation never happened. But something had shifted in him, subtle but clear. He was watching me again. Not with suspicion but with hunger. Like someone who'd seen a crack in the wall and wanted to know how deep it went. That's when I knew. He didn't see my resistance as betrayal. He saw it as unfinished work. He thought I was relapsing. I was no longer a threat. I was just a version of myself he hadn't yet fixed. That made him predictable. And predictability, I was learning, was leverage. So I started lying. Small intentional lies. I told him I was going to the pharmacy. Instead, I walked 3 miles to a local library and used the public computers to access the email account he thought was gone. I ordered a new flash drive, had it shipped to the P.O. box. I told him I'd misplaced my wallet, then found it 2 days later after he'd scoured the house looking for it. I wanted to know where he searched. I wanted to trace his methods. And I wanted to make sure he knew how it felt to doubt reality, even in a fraction of the way I had. Then I found the lockbox. It was pure accident. I wasn't snooping, not that day. I was cleaning the spare room, the one he called his creative office, where he kept his tools and sentimental junk in carefully labeled drawers. He was out grocery shopping. I moved a bin to dust behind a shelf and heard a dull metallic thud against the hardwood. I crouched down, shifted the bin again, and there it was, wedged behind the lowest cabinet. A matte black box with a small combination dial. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was surprised he had secrets, but because I already knew what was inside. Not in detail but in theme. And I was right. It only took me 5 minutes to crack the code. His birthday. He was always more arrogant than clever. The lid opened with a soft click, and what I saw inside made my breath leave my body like a slow exhale. There, laid out with surgical neatness, were pieces of me. Not just stolen objects but archived ones. The black mug cleaned and intact. The missing sketch from college. The lavender oil. A crumpled photo of me and Alina from the beach trip we'd taken just before I met him. The letter from my sister I thought had gotten lost in the move. He hadn't destroyed anything. He'd collected it. Preserved it like relics of an earlier version of me he'd retired. But what gutted me wasn't the contents, It was the labels. Each item had a tiny post-it note, written in his handwriting. Descriptors. Judgments. The mug said, "Too attached, unhealthy nostalgia." The photo said, "Influence encourages regression." The letter, "Too emotional, destabilizes perception." My entire life had been analyzed, filtered, then removed like it was contaminating something pure. I sank to the floor, hands trembling, the box still open in front of me. I wanted to scream, to tear everything apart. But instead I took photos. One by one. Every item. Every note. Every piece of evidence that he wasn't erasing me. He was curating his version of me, and locking the rest away like clutter. When I heard the garage door, I snapped the lid shut, shoved the box back behind the bin, and stood up with the vacuum in my hand, the cord coiled around my wrist like rope. He walked in with bags of groceries, and smiled like he always did when he thought he was coming home to peace. I smiled back, took a bag from his hands, kissed his cheek. "You remembered the almond milk," I said. He grinned. Of course I did. I turned away quickly before he could see the look in my eyes. Not rage. Not fear. Just the cold clarity of a woman cataloging the contents of her own captivity. That night, I left the journal on his desk again. The fake one. I added a new page. I think maybe I overreacted. I wanted him to believe I was spiraling back toward dependence. I wanted him to feel safe in his illusion. Because I needed time. I needed to move the photos to a new location, encrypt the files, schedule backups, prepare the drop for Alina. I needed him distracted by victory. Because when people like him think they've won, they stop watching as closely. And that's when you strike. I lay in bed later staring at the ceiling, the weight of the lockbox pressed into my thoughts like a fingerprint. He didn't hate me. That was the worst part. He thought he loved me. Deeply. Permanently. He thought he was saving me from myself. And when people love their version of you more than they love you, they will do anything to protect that version. Even if it means erasing you entirely. But I was done being erased. The flash drive was labeled before in my handwriting, but I didn't remember ever labeling it. I found it wedged beneath the sketch in the lockbox, wrapped in an old receipt from a hardware store. I stared at it for a long time before touching it. Not because I feared what was on it, but because some part of me already knew. It was heavier than it should have been psychologically, not physically. A relic from a life I wasn't sure I trusted anymore. That night, after he went to bed, I crept downstairs, plugged it into the decoy laptop I'd stolen back from his closet during one of his long morning showers. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. There were 9 files on the drive. All videos. All named only by date, timestamps from just over 2 years ago. The first was shaky, filmed on a phone propped against a candle jar. I pressed play. My own face stared back at me. Slightly younger. Eyes wider but not softer. I watched Hermie take a deep breath before speaking. "I think I'm losing time," I said. My voice was quiet, unsteady. Or no, not time. I'm losing objects. And people. And myself. I laughed, then covered my mouth. That sounds insane. I know how it sounds. I reached off screen, pulled a notebook into frame. But I've started writing things down. Passwords. Conversations. Where I leave things. 'Cause sometimes they're just gone. And when I ask him about it, he acts like I'm fragile. Like I need protecting from my own memory. The second video was darker. I'd filmed it in the bathroom, door locked. My voice cracked as I whispered. He rearranged the bookshelf again. Said it's more logical this way. But now half the books I remember reading, books I underlined, books with notes in them, they're not there. When I asked, he said they were always like this. I know they weren't. I watched my on-screen self break down in real time. Tears building but never falling. I used to be sure of things, I said. Now I'm not even sure this video will still exist tomorrow. By the 4th video, the light in my eyes was dimming. There was resignation now, not fear. I found my own email open on his laptop today. He said it was a mistake. That he was just helping me clean out spam. But I saw the tab. He was in my draft folder. I paused. There was a message there. One I didn't write. To my sister. Saying I was fine. That I needed space. I never hit send. But it was there. And it was signed with my name. I stopped the playback. Sat with my hand over my mouth for a full minute. I couldn't cry. I couldn't even scream. I felt cold, like my blood had slowed. The horror wasn't just that he'd been controlling me now. It was that he'd been doing it then. Back when I thought we were still in love. Back when I thought my confusion was just exhaustion. He hadn't changed. He had perfected the system. And I had already escaped once, just far enough to document it. Then forgotten. Or been made to forget. I pressed play on the final video. This one was different. More composed. The version of me on screen was clear-eyed, almost prepared. If you're watching this, she began, then it means you forgot again. Or you were made to. She leaned in closer. He's not just gaslighting you. He's curating you. He's building a version of you he can manage. He deletes the things that give you roots, photos, letters, relationships. He wants you weightless. Easier to rotate. A pause. A breath. You've tried to leave once. You packed a bag. You even bought a bus ticket. I'm guessing you don't remember that part. He found it. He convinced you to stay. He cried, remember? Said you were confused. That you always get like this when you're tired. On screen, I reached behind me and held something up. A small yellow envelope. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was the envelope. The one Alina had returned to me weeks ago. I didn't understand how she'd had it, but now I knew. It was a piece of my original escape plan. Something I must have left behind. She had found it. Saved it. And when she gave it back to me, she didn't even know she was returning a ghost. The video continued. You might be tempted to talk to him again. Don't. He won't admit it. Not because he's hiding, but because he believes it. He thinks he fixed you. He thinks you're his redemption story. I watched myself sigh. You don't need permission to leave. You don't need proof. This, I gestured to the screen, is enough. You are real. You are real. And if he finds this, don't let him tell you it's fake. I paused the video. Just sat there in the dark. The glow of the screen illuminating my face the same way it had lit hers. It was the most surreal thing I'd ever experienced. Being comforted by a version of myself who had prepared for this moment. A version who had known she might disappear. Who had tried to leave, failed, and still found the strength to leave clues for the future. For me. I made copies of every file. Backed them up twice. One to the flash drive going to Alina. One to a timed cloud release I programmed to go live if I didn't check in every 72 hours. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was preserving the chain of truth. A chain he hadn't counted on. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I didn't recognize my reflection, not because I looked different but because I saw the seams now. The scars. The edits. I wasn't the woman he built. And I wasn't the girl who recorded those videos either. I was both. And neither. I was something new. Something whole. I didn't run. That was important to me. I didn't want to leave like a fugitive, breath ragged, suitcase half-zipped, door swinging behind me. That's how he'd written the ending in his head. Me panicked and unstable. Fleeing into the dark, proving his point. I knew if I left like that, he'd spin it for everyone. Friends, neighbors, his mother who still sent us Christmas cards in July. She just unraveled, he'd say. I tried everything. I fixed what I could. No, I wasn't going to give him that version. If he loved stories so much, I was going to give him a better one. One with footnotes. One with citations. One he couldn't edit. I waited 4 days. Long enough to ensure he'd gone back to normal. To comfort. To the quiet belief that I was healing. I gave him peace. Smiled when he made dinner. Laughed at a joke I barely heard. I even let him reorganize my spice drawer again. I knew he needed that illusion of influence. That's what made it easy to vanish. Not physically, but emotionally. While he was watching me live, I was archiving every piece of the truth he tried to erase. And by the time I left, I had already mailed it. It wasn't dramatic. Just a padded envelope, nondescript, sent to 7 people who mattered in his world. His boss. His sister. His mentor. His best friend. Each received a copy of the flash drive labeled before. Each accompanied by a short and signed note. You should know the full version. No accusations. No pleas. Just evidence. Video. Documentation. Dates. Labels. The lockbox photos too, including the one where he'd labeled my father's voicemail. Emotionally destabilizing. Interferes with present clarity. I debated whether to include that one. In the end I did. Not because I wanted to destroy him, but because I wanted them to see exactly what he considered interference. I also left a copy for him. On his desk. No note. Just the drive. In the center of a manila folder with a single post-it on the front. Unedited. I packed lightly. Not because I couldn't take more, but because I didn't want to. Everything I needed, I'd already taken back. Memory, name, direction. I left behind the mug. The sketch. Even the yellow envelope, which I folded into the lockbox before I pushed it slightly forward, into the open, like a museum exhibit waiting for its final visitor. Let him decide what to do with it. Whether to hide it again, or destroy it, or stare at it every night, wondering how he lost control of the story. I took the bus. Felt right. The slowness of it. The deliberate distance. The sound of rubber rolling over pavement like breath. I sat by the window, watched suburbs blur into silence. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was moving. That mattered. At the next town, I got off and walked 3 blocks to a mailbox that didn't belong to me, but held my name now. Inside was the backup drive I'd sent myself. I placed it in my bag. Unopened. I didn't need to watch the videos again. I just needed to know they were there. Alina met me at a diner 30 miles from the state line. She didn't ask for explanations. Just slid a cup of coffee across the table and said, "You made it." I nodded. We didn't talk about him, or what came next. We just sat there for an hour, eating pancakes at 4 p.m. like nothing had happened. Like I wasn't a woman reassembled by force. Like I hadn't just rewritten my own ending. Later that night, in the motel room, I turned on the TV but didn't watch it. I stood in the mirror for a long time, brushing my hair in slow, methodical strokes. I wasn't trying to look nice. I wasn't preparing for anyone. I just wanted to remind myself that I still moved, that I had a body, that I cast a shadow that no one else could edit. I pulled out a notebook. A new one. Blank. I didn't start writing immediately. I just held it, felt the weight of it in my lap. The promise of it. For years, I had let someone else shape the narrative. Now I would write my own.
No agenda. No explanasten.
Just truth. Raw and uneven. Like breath. Like scars. Like me. The final scene isn't him finding the drive. Or the lockbox. Or the emails that begin trickling into his world from people who are no longer sure they trust him. The final scene isn't rage or denial. It's confusion. The kind that seeps. The kind that can't be reasoned with. He will try to explain it away. Reframe it. But every time he opens one of those videos and sees my face looking back at him, unflinching, deliberate, unbroken, he will feel something he can't quite name. Loss. Because I was never his to fix. If you've ever had someone make you question your own memories, this story was for you. Subscribe for more slow burn revenge stories that hit deeper than justice. See you soon in our next story.